Good morning and welcome to our Milwaukee Urban League Virtual Community Roundtable. As always, we're here to engage, to educate, and inform our community on critical issues. We're fortunate to have BMO Harris Bank as our sponsor, and we're happy to have as our guest today, Sheriff Earnell Lucas. Our next roundtable will be September 30th. Just a reminder that we have our community roundtables the last Wednesday of every month, so please join us. Sheriff Lucas is the 65th Sheriff of Milwaukee County, elected on November 6, 2018, with the goal of restoring honor, integrity, and trust in the Sheriff's Office by treating everyone with dignity and respect. He commands a staff that is responsible for safety and security at the Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport, the Milwaukee County Circuit Courts, the Milwaukee County Jail, and the Milwaukee County Parks and Freeway Systems. Sheriff Lucas was born in Milwaukee's Hillside Terrace housing project, and upon the death of his mother was raised by his grandmother. He attended Milwaukee Public Schools and has a bachelor's degree cum laude in criminology and law studies from Marquette University. Before becoming sheriff, he served as Major League Baseball Chief Liaison of Security and Investigations for the National Association of Professional Baseball League. His 17-year career took him to all parts of the world, overseeing security operations, conducting sensitive investigations, and safeguarding the integrity of the game of baseball at the major and minor league levels. Sheriff Lucas chose a career in law enforcement at an early age after an encounter with a police officer, which showed him the awesome authority that officers hold. In a career spanning over 25 years, he served as the department's public information officer and as a district commander. He retired at the rank of captain. Sheriff Lucas still bears the scars of sustaining a shotgun blast to the right side of his face as a young officer. He and his wife reside in Milwaukee and attend St. Matthew's CME Church, where he has been an active member for over 50 years. Sheriff Lucas, thank you for joining us. And thank you to all of you that have joined us today as well. So I think we are all at a weary stage as we're watching what is occurring in our state, our next door neighbor, Kenosha. Something that I never would have expected would be occurring as we're having a conversation today with someone who represents law enforcement. But it's also a time which demands that we stand together, that we're united, that we're strategic, that we're calm against all of probably the frustrations and anger that we may be feeling as we see continued violence in the wake of an attempt to bring justice and just social equity in our country. So I would just urge us to stay the course during this difficult time. There are so many of us that I believe are in key roles around this city, this county, this state, that even in the midst of challenge, we will be creative, we will be resilient, we will be persistent, and we will come up with a resolve to keep us moving forward. I'm hoping that our sheriff will come on. I know that it is oftentimes our technical difficulties. Well, I do see one of our longtime advocates and supporters, Carl Mueller. So, good morning, Carl.
Hey, you instead of me, yeah.
The sheriff's gonna be under me.
Change
that name.
Oh my God, I can. The seat is real low.
There you are.
Well, does it?
Sheriff Lucas, you're on. You're on. So I just, so good morning. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me is the more important question,
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Yeah, this is only my fourth call this morning, so you would think by this time we would have the technical difficulties and challenges worked out, but we ran into a little snag here. So let me just get comfortable and adjusted in a different seat.
Okay.
And maybe be better prepared for you. So I'm sorry, Dr. Hall. Good morning to you and good morning to the audience.
Well, good morning. So let me just, so first of all, welcome. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. Your schedule is quite busy, so we were able to get through the challenges of your busy schedule and allow you to join us today. I already gave your background, Sheriff Lucas, so people are quite aware of your background here in Milwaukee, your background with the Baseball Association, so basically your national and international roles, as well as your recent role here before you took on the role as sheriff. What I also, though, did speak about was just the unfortunate situation that we are in right now with the Kenosha violence. And I would be remiss to not say anything about it because it is definitely heavy on the minds of us as urban leaguers who both locally and nationally are fighting and working towards just justice, but also unity and collaboration and just, making the landscape a better place and a safe place. So I would just ask you before I get started, what are your thoughts as you're watching what is occurring in Kenosha and just, just overall, because you're looking at this from a leadership role yourself. And what I do admire and appreciate is that you are very focused around integrity, trust, respect as part of your theme. So in the midst of what we're experiencing, what are your thoughts? What are your perspectives before we go into our formal conversation?
Well, thank you again, Dr. Hall, and certainly the Milwaukee Urban League and all of the friends and well-wishers on to call today. I find myself, and our community finds ourselves in the midst of a scenario that we had hoped and thought wouldn't play itself out here in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin. And here it is just 40 miles outside our border, a very unfortunate circumstance involving law enforcement and the community in which it serves. Since the unfortunate shooting of Mr. Blake, there has been, I think, a number of areas where, as law enforcement, we can and we must improve upon. Transparency. I don't sense there's been a whole lot of information forthcoming out of Kenosha thus far that is helping this community and the country grasp the situation that transpired in Kenosha. I think I was on a call earlier today. I'm hopeful that at a 1 o'clock press conference today, that authorities in Kenosha are going to address some of the just basic questions as to what transpired leading up to Mr. Blake being shot multiple times by a Kenosha police officer. I think some of the commentary that has been made by many people has not been helpful to the situation. There's been some comments and statements by those that only inflame the situation down in Kenosha and around the country for that matter. So I'm hopeful that everyone overnight, and particularly into last night and to this morning, where violence broke out in the Kenosha, and reportedly individuals with long rifles and may not necessarily be from the community, but regardless, shot 2 individuals and a third individual, killed 2 individuals and a third individual also being injured. We've got to, as a community, come together and not tolerate that type of violence. I think the family could not have spoken more eloquently, and their attorneys yesterday, in terms of addressing the wishes of Mr. Blake and the family as to how the Kenosha community and everyone can respond to the situation, and how do we work best to get justice for Mr. Blake and justice for the Kenosha community and for our community at large. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of people talking. A lot of people should be doing a lot more things. And I'm hopeful that work begins in earnest this day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, with that, let's talk about you, because this really is about you today, and the significant role that you play, but also just the value as a person and the substance that you bring is what everyone should learn about. So talk a little bit about your childhood. I know you and I shared that in the last conversation, and I thought it was very intriguing and very revealing. But talk a bit about your childhood and then that turning point that signaled that interest for you in law enforcement.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I think my story is one that's been shared with many, and that I'm a product of this community. I have the ability to say I was born in the Hillside Housing Project. And I know that there are some on this call and many in this community that say, well, I'm from Hillside. But no, I was born in Hillside. And I love to point that out for many. And my family moved shortly after my birth to the west side, right near 18th and Cherry. And then after the disturbances of 1967, we relocated to the area now known as Harambe. And it was there my formulation began. In 1969, a mother, single mother who worked as a nurse, passed, and a grandmother who was a domestic in rural Alabama, outside of small town Jasper, outside of Birmingham, sold everything that she had worked for as a domestic and moved to Alabama to raise 3 boys, me being the youngest. And it was there my formulation began, the golden rule: treat everyone with respect, treat everyone how you want to be treated. And certainly a hard day's work for a hard day's pay. And in that lesson, Grandma taught some very hard lessons. Along about age 12 or 13, I was walking from the corner of 2nd and Burleigh to 1st and Burleigh when a police officer pulls along, never gets out of his squad car. And the police officer rolls down the window and says, "Hey, kid, you stole a woman's purse." I said, "No, sir, I didn't." He said, "Yes, you did." I said, "Sir, I got a note and $20, and I'm going to Russell's Food Store right here on the corner." And he said, well, I'm going to run you over and have this woman identify you. And I said, sir, you can do that. But if the woman doesn't identify me, you're going to run me back over here to the store and help me get these groceries home because grandma's going to be pretty upset. In a moment, that officer sped away. And in that very moment, it was when I knew what I wanted to do. When you think about the awesome authority and privilege that a law enforcement officer has, they can determine whether an individual goes free or whether an individual is taken into custody. They can determine whether an individual lives, and in these unfortunate circumstances that we see, whether a person loses his or her life. And when you think about the encounters that Black and brown men and women are having today with law enforcement and the encounter that I speak of, what's different about that? Well, it begins, I think, simply with trust. There was a trust in the community for law enforcement. Most of the law enforcement officers, Black and white, knew everybody in the neighborhood, and everybody in the neighborhood knew the law enforcement officers. We knew them by name: Thelma Cheney's, Art Jones, Uriel Jordan. The list goes on and on. They came down on the playgrounds at Garfield Park and other playgrounds and Boys and Girls Club, and in uniform, played with the young men and women. And then later that very same day, they'd be the ones telling us to get into class, get in school, or get home. And so there was a trust there that doesn't exist. The community worked with the police in those days, I think a lot closer, a lot better. I remember very vividly the disturbances of 1967 and the National Guard patrolling the streets of Milwaukee, and business owners having Soul Brother and Black Power written on their businesses to let the people know that, hey, we're supportive of this community. So we've seen a lot of the trust erode. And part of my goal and intention for returning to Milwaukee after my 25-year career in the police department and 17 years at baseball was to help restore that honor, integrity, and trust back to this community. And I'm committed to it. That's my goal. I'm not deterred by the events of today or last month or any other time. I'm very much dedicated to the goal of restoring that honor, integrity, and trust back to Milwaukee. And it's a process that's going to involve everybody, including everyone on this call and the entire community. But I'm one dedicated public servant.
So with that, how is what you just said reflected in your day-to-day work?
Very, very good question. And a lot of it, Dr. Hall, I can't even describe, but let's face it, Milwaukee County had a sheriff who previously served in this position and enjoyed very much the highlight, enjoyed very much being away from the office, and enjoyed very much all of the attention it gotten for himself. I'm not one who's focused. I had a wonderful life. I had a wonderful career. 25 years in the police department, suffered a line of duty, gunshot, but was fortunate that I was able to recover from that and return back to work. And then out of the misfortune of 9/11, to have the opportunity to join Major League Baseball and spend the very first 6 years of that time in baseball working under Milwaukee's own Alan H. Bud Selig, who for the 22 years that he ran Major League Baseball, he ran it from his office here on the 22nd floor of the US Bank building. So having that benefit, I think, has really helped me. We've got a lot of challenges in our community, as I see, to help restore honor and integrity and trust. And part of it is just doing the simple things, the humanity in which we treat people in our jail. We lived through a period here in Milwaukee where in 18 months, 7 people died in the Milwaukee County Jail. We had to change that. We had to change that not only because, again, the depths of the inhumanity in which people were treated there, but also because of the lawsuits and the loss of taxpayer dollars that were a result of that mismanagement. So that's one way we changed it. How we treated one another. The previous administration looked very little to the leaders of the organization for input as to the decision-making process and how services was going to be provided to the people of Milwaukee County. I invite everyone's input, the community's input, the board and the executive's input, as well as all of our command staff, and make that difficult decision. I said, much like President Kennedy said, that we're going to do things not because they're easy, but because they're hard, and because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our skills and ability. And because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one that we're unwilling to postpone, and one that we're determined to win. So we're willing to do all of the hard things, make the difficult decisions as it relates to incarceration of men and women in our community, collaborating with ICE and other agencies in our community, partnering with all the municipal police departments here in Milwaukee County was something that did not happen very well in the previous administration. And then I said how we were going to work in this community. When I came here, and I see my good friend, Mr. Carl Miller on the phone on this call, and he knows how our good friend, Mr. Sidley would describe it. When I inherited this office, you had the sheriff banging the executive banging the board, and everybody was banging everybody, and nothing was getting done. But I came in with an attitude of, okay, listen, we can have disagreements, but what we're going to do is we're going to have disagreements in the room. And then when we come out of these rooms, we're going to go out and we're going to be unified in terms of how we're going to move forward Milwaukee County and how we're going to best approach law enforcement in this community. And that's been my commitment. And despite some having differences with me, I've been able to win over, for the most part, all those in the previous board that had challenges and differences with me. In fact, I counted that some of the ones that were most opposed to my coming to office were most supportive of me when they left office. And that's a testament to my willingness to work. And now we have a new, partly new board, new chairwoman, new executive, and I'm dedicated and committed to working with them to affect change here in our community, how we deliver services in our parks so that seniors can go for a walk, how we are delivering services on our interstate so that people are not stressed going to and from work because of the recklessness that we see on our freeways and the shots being fired on our freeways. And then how we our beautiful jewel of a lakefront and all the cultural attractions and institutions that we have in Milwaukee County. This sheriff's office is committed to working, partnering with all of the agencies in Milwaukee County to get the job done. And since day one, we've been doing that, Dr. Hall.
So one of the things that I think reflects what you're talking about with the trust, the integrity, is your willingness to call out some observations around racial disparities with the stay-at-home arrests. Could you speak more to that?
Well, a couple of observations, just from my witnessing, what certainly I couldn't have imagined, and no one else, a COVID. And here we are 5-6 months into it now. And the challenges that it brought to communities all across this country and the lack of leadership that we see on that issue. And then it came down to the enforcement of safer at home orders here and in other places. And I know many of my counterparts around the state took attitudes of not enforcing the safer at home order. And when they were, it seemed that it had a disparate impact on people of color and or young people. And even right here in Milwaukee, I think in the very early days, the enforcement was specifically targeted toward those that were taken into custody and or involved in some criminal activity, which by and large were Black and brown people. And so we were compounding one issue with another issue by tagging on safer at home citations to those individuals. And so again, I thought there was disparities in how that is enforced, much like a lot of laws here in our area are treated differently in Milwaukee versus in the other 18 municipalities. And that's a conversation that when we have all of these broader conversations of what the role of police is going to be moving forward, and how do we reform the police and such, we need to have broader discussions on things like the decriminalization of marijuana, and certainly, again, enforcement of safer at home orders and other orders that tend to have a disparate impact on Black and brown people and communities of color. We've got to change that, but it's only going to be because of everyone being enlightened and aware of this issue in our community.
So could I add, and this we really didn't quite plan for this question, but what continues to stay in my mind, Sheriff Lucas, is individuals who've been arrested or in custody either through the protests or through the stay at home that we just talked about. What happens to them? So if they get a fine, they don't have money to pay it. If they don't have advocates, does this mean now we're just adding more Black and brown people into our jails that are now stuck? Or is there some kind of advocacy that's occurring for them in these particular situations?
There are a number of things that are going on in the community. At the start of the COVID, and one of the things that we did that, again, you don't hear me talk about because I'm not out in front of a camera every day talking about, look at what I've done, look at what we've done. But we began focusing in on COVID in 2019 when a member of my staff came to our command meeting and said, hey, this is going on over in China. And, he's been talking with some medical professionals and others, and that it could very well, arrive here in the United States. I got to admit, by and large, he was dismissed by our command staff. But knowing the energy of this young man and my having a conversation to him, decided to say, look, when we get back from the holiday break, and if we see it's transmitting itself around the country and everything like that, let's continue this discussion. And as we know, at the start of this year, COVID began to expand in Washington State, and then into New Orleans and Louisiana, and then into New York and other places. And now it's done spread all over the country. And here we are 6 months into the spread. And so we started doing a number of things in Milwaukee County so that we could diminish the exposure of not only those persons entrusted to our care, but of the people that are out here serving during this pandemic. And so we started ordering PPE at an early stage, way early in the game. And we're very fortunate and able to stockpile a lot of the masks and gloves and sanitizers and other things like that. We constantly looking at best practices employed by jails around the country and others. And then we, more importantly, started focusing in on home, and that we began to collaborate with the courts here in Milwaukee County. As we well know, the courts sort of scaled back their operations. We started looking at how can we get those individuals out of custody who had just municipal charges, and even prevent those individuals in the 19 municipalities, including the city of Milwaukee, from entering into the jail just on basic municipal charges. And I'm talking, driving after revocation or DWI or any number of things like that. And so we were able to take our jail population, which was around 800, 900 on a daily basis pre-COVID. And by working with the Department of Corrections, the House of Correction, the County Executive's Office, and others, we were able to get that number to a daily average now of roughly about 600, 630 or 40 or so, while at the same time understanding we got to maintain public safety in Milwaukee County. And so we began that. We also began the process of video intake here in Milwaukee County. something that a lot of people in Milwaukee County do not know and do not talk about. We're the only county in the state of Wisconsin that does not have video intake, meaning that an individual that's taken into custody, and instead of requiring that law enforcement agency to have that individual brought into a courtroom and transporting him or her through, and we know how our situation is here in Milwaukee County, to bring them out of the jail and through the common hallways of the courthouse in shackles and other things like that, which tends to criminalize Black and brown people in and of itself as well. And take them into a courtroom, sometimes for not even making a statement or even being brought out of the holding cell or the bullpen. Their attorneys determine whatever action is taken. So we were able to work with the courts to get video intake. And I think that that's something coming out of COVID that has worked well and can work well. And for that matter, given that 71 other counties has it, we should have it here in Milwaukee County. And we were also, we separated all of our inmates, single cells. All of our inmates in custody are in single cells so that we diminish the spread of COVID. For the first 3 months, 2-3 months, give or take, we did not have one positive test in our jail. And that's truly an accomplishment. But given the fact that this is a marathon and not a sprint, we've had incidents now of positives coming to the jail, the individual that's taken into custody for a very serious crime, and we have no alternative. We can't release him or her back out to the street. That individual has to remain in custody. We keep him or her in a separate cell. We diminish the amount of time out of cells. We provide masks and for the people entrusted to our care. And then even our people are required to maintain a level of separation. Lunchrooms are no more group affairs, if you will. Individuals eat separately, can't congregate, of course, keep the 6-foot distance or more. Wash your hands frequently, wear PPE at all times, which is a mandate now in Milwaukee County, in the state for that matter. And so we've taken a number of steps to ensure we do not continue to spread the virus, but at the same time, protecting those that are entrusted to our care, which is something that was part of our commitment when we came into office in January of 2019.
Wow, you're doing quite a bit. So, Sheriff Lucas, you gave a story earlier about your childhood when you spoke about the interaction that you had with the policeman. So when we fast forward to today, that story was great, but could that reasonably apply to a youth reacting that way in today's environment? And to that, what's your advice? What's your direction to our young people, especially our Black and brown youth, as they're navigating the complexities of COVID, the restrictions, and then again, even their own fears and mistrust as they're watching the media every day. I mean, they're seeing all of this. And quite frankly, we've had a couple of panels in which we've spoken with our youth that are connected to the Urban League, and they've expressed concerns. They've expressed some fears. So what are your words to them?
I've had a number of conversations, Dr. Hall, with groups of students, whether from Marquette University, some of the schools, as we came to the end of the school year. And one thing that I'll always remember was a young woman who attends my alma mater, Rufus King High School, asked me the question, Mr. Lucas, how do I prevent from becoming the next hashtag? And that question just shook me to the core, that's how some young people think, that their life is so worthless that any day or any moment now that they too could become the next hashtag. And so it's critical that all of us have conversations with our young people. let me come back to this. Let me draw back to the scenario that I talked about, that after that encounter that I had, I continued on and graduated Rufus King High School. I joined the police department at age 18. And in that very first week of my assignment at the 5th District down on 4th and Locust, which is less than a half a mile from where I grew up, on the very first day that I walked through the assembly room at District number 5, who do you think I ran into but that one officer that I encountered as a young boy? And I went up to him and I said, "Sir, do you remember me?" And of course, nobody likes to be asked that question. And he recoiled. And I said, no, before you get alarmed, I just want you to know it's because of you that I'm on this job, because of the way you treated me with so much dignity. And that he could have, again, taken me into custody and God only knows what. So I know I never feared the police, and I would encourage young people today not to fear the police. That officer is white and German. I'm African-American and Black. That officer was from the south side of Milwaukee. I'm from the north side of Milwaukee. But we had a common goal to want to serve and protect our community. He and his brother, who was also on the job, and I are still friends to this day. And I tell this story because I've asked permission, could I tell the story of how he impacted me as a young man. It's incumbent upon our young people to not be fearful of law enforcement. Law enforcement has a duty, and they have certain authority that's given to them by the communities that they serve. There are 18,000 law enforcement agencies in this country, and they're there for a reason, because communities say that we want law enforcement in our communities. So the people entrust law enforcement with certain authority. And we as people living within a community got to understand that when an officer asks certain basic questions, he or she has the authority to do that. And to not comply with that only then tends to cause other things to happen and play out. And obviously they lead to unfortunate situations and circumstances. Trust in law enforcement. By and large, every one of us come to serve. We place a badge over our heart, leave our homes with the same concerns and fears as well, because there's so much danger lurking out there. And I have friends who did not return home as a result of putting on this uniform. So some of our young people and some of our people are afraid as well. But have trust in the people that serve us in our community. Be able to communicate very well what it is you're doing, where you're going, and not, engage in avoidance conversations, because again, it only then spirals into other areas. And then at the same time, let that officer know that you're a man or a woman of dignity and worth, and that you're not going to tolerate any mistreatment by him or her. You have a right to ask them for your badge number. You have a right to ask them their name. You have the right to ask for a supervisor to be present if you think that they're in any kind of way impugning your person and integrity. So it's incumbent upon our young people to stand up to law enforcement, but it goes to the basic element, Dr. Hall, and we started this conversation off with that. It's that trust. And I know it's been torn, it's been lost. Certainly what we witnessed in Kenosha just this past week doesn't help the conversation. And let's face it, we are where we are today because of the very unfortunate circumstance and the depths of man's inhumanity to man shown back on May 25th, when a former Minneapolis police officer placed his knee on the neck of Mr. George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And all the world had the opportunity to witness that. And so that is what sears in our brain and in our mind. And even as recent as last night, cell phone cameras and footage of a young man that had a long barreled rifle firing shots indiscriminately and hitting 3 people. Those are the things that remain on our minds. But we've got to not be guided by what we see, but what we feel and what we know. And that is how we, our constitution, our foundation that's provided to us by our families, by our education, by our community. And again, having police in our in our communities is a very basic foundation. And again, it starts with that trust.
Mhm. Thank you for that. So last question before we enter into our chat box.
Mhm.
Business and community leaders. I know that was another part of our discussion that we had one-on-one, and the importance of their leadership, the importance of their input, the importance of our collaboration together. What role do you see business and community leaders distinctly taking as we transform and change this narrative?
I think it's a very important role that they play. And again, I said from the outset, I said on May 29th, which was the Saturday after the first Friday of unrest here in Milwaukee, that standing right at the corner of King and Locust, that this is my community. This is our community. And what we witnessed last night at the Fast and Friendly, at the Walgreens, and at the Walmart on East Capitol, and the Foot Lockers or the shoe stores on West Capitol and other places like that, that's not our community acting in that way. And we need to conduct ourselves better than that. And again, I said, we can have this conversation on reforming the police, but it begins with everybody being at the table. It cannot be just simply the voice of a few speaking for the many. It cannot just be that one elected official who is acting on his or her on whim without even polling his or her constituents. It's got to be everybody in the community. So I've said publicly that we've got to have the business community at the table, and they've got to be coming full, ready to open up and provide opportunities and money. I'm not just talking about job training, a word we hear all the time, job training. When I see and open up the Business Journal and other publications, people are getting real jobs, not job training. So we got to have real jobs and opportunities for people in this community. We got to talk about the philanthropic community, focusing in on other communities in Milwaukee other than the downtown and those merging communities. I see the community of Milwaukee as a whole. Dr. King once said that we're all caught in this inescapable network of mutuality, tied by a single garment of destiny, and that what affects one community affects every community. So if we don't have the third ward growing and developing, and the fifth ward growing and developing, and Garden Homes growing and developing, and Sherman Park growing and developing, then we're not really progressing. We've got to have everybody progressing at the same time. And so it does require the business community, the philanthropic community, the faith-based community, the health community, education. Everybody plays a role, but particularly the community as a whole has a voice in what the future of Milwaukee and our community looks like. And unless and until everybody is heard, let's not act too swiftly. I just saw recently where we saw for a month or more the overtaking of a neighborhood in Seattle, and then the calls for demands for defunding the Seattle Police Department, and even legislation that passed the Common Council in Seattle, only to be vetoed by a mayor who finds herself very much in the crucible of challenges and issues there in Seattle. But she had the courage to stand in the crucible and say, everybody has not had the opportunity to speak, and unless and until everybody is heard, we cannot make this change. Same thing in Portland and Chicago, Atlanta and Richmond and other places. We've got to take that same tack and approach here, unless and until everybody has a voice and everybody is heard. The neighbors in the communities. I speak to a lot of people in this community that are not out protesting. They by and large support law enforcement on a daily basis, don't want to see law enforcement go away, certainly are not supportive of bad police officers in their community, but they understand the importance of having policing in our community. And thus, unless and until everybody has a seat at the table and we have a substantive conversation and dialogue, Dr. Hall, we ought not overreact to the voice of a few. I'm supportive of a number of our young people that are out there. Some of the movements are reminiscent of the bus boycott in 1955, the sit-ins in the early 60s, 61, led by the late C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Lewis. And those efforts to hit communities where it hurts economically, that certainly is a worthwhile venture. We have the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington taking place on Friday. The 57th anniversary on the March of Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And here we are 57 years and later, still marching for jobs and freedom. We've got to have substantive conversations and dialogues, and then we got to have action, Dr. Hall.
I agree. Thank you. And you know, one of the unfortunate outcomes of the word defund has been that it's been taken as get rid of police departments. And in reality, I believe in what continues to be stated is it's, you know, revisiting the allocation of funding and how do we balance out the social service needs that oftentimes police find themselves engaged in. So, you know, I think that's just another one of those, the language that we're using that can either inspire or discourage. And I think that defund, unfortunately, and this is just, you know, an Eve Hall opinion, not necessarily that of the Urban League, but that the advice of using defund was not the best because it triggered negatively when I do not believe that was the initial intent at all. So with that, I'd like to open and just thank you so much for your candor and just your sharing on so many levels. And I'd like to open our chat box, invite our participants to please submit your questions to the chat box. We do have someone from my staff who will be looking at the questions and calling them out so that we can actually have an engaged conversation.
Okay.
And I apologize to my audience for not mentioning that earlier. I guess I just took it for granted people would probably be submitting questions.
Hi, this is Tangela. This is Tangela. I am not seeing any questions in the chat box at this time, Dr. Hall.
Okay. Are there any comments? Doesn't have to be a question. Any comments that any of our listeners would like to make?
Faith, can you still hear me?
Hello, this is Greg Fanning. Can everybody hear me?
Hi, Greg. We can.
Hi. I submitted a question to the chat box. Maybe it's not submitted as in submitted. But my question is, how can we expedite and enforce punitive actions against officers who are in obvious violation of the law?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Fanning. You know, that certainly is an issue that I know a lot of us want answers to, is that how can a officer commit an egregious act? And we could all agree what we witnessed in Minneapolis, for example, was an egregious act. And how can officers in some instances not only not be charged and or prosecuted, but also continue to collect a salary while whatever process of adjudication does take place. I guess it's called due process, Mr. Fanning. And one of the things in law enforcement, in their Bill of Rights, if you will, is the right to due process, much like every citizen in America has. And certainly coming from a union family, the advent and advocacy on the part of unions, and particularly here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin with the Milwaukee Police Association, is very, very strong. And the legislature has not responded and reacted to the people in the way that the people would want. And that officers continue to collect pay for years or find avenues by which they can get a disability and receive a compensation for life when we view their actions as a breach in the community. And so I think it's a question for the legislature that they've got to look at how they are not addressing the community at large. I know Milwaukee is but one of 71 counties, and by and large, the opinion in the state of Wisconsin differ a lot than those in Milwaukee County. So that's the uphill battle there. But even right here in Milwaukee, and for that matter, Mr. Fanning, in law enforcement agencies around the country, it takes a courageous leader to discipline an officer when he or she commits a violation. And I say courageous because they know they're going to be going against the grain of the police union. And they have a very vocal union, particularly again here in the city of Milwaukee. And so a leader has to be courageous, has to be bold, has to be willing, to take criticism. Yet at the same time, though, you've got to be you got to be fair and issuing discipline. I think it's a process that needs to be very public. It needs to be very swift. And then when there is a decision rendered, it's got to be made known. You can't, in darkness, issue discipline and the other officers not know that an individual committed a violation and was suspended and or dismissed for that action because there's no lessons being learned there. I had to come in and change that here in the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, that disciplines were not read at roll calls, were not posted. I said, why not? Well, we've always done it that way. Well, we're no longer going to do it that way. Okay, we're going to change that. Disciplines are very public. And I know one that many are concerned about here in Milwaukee County, and particularly in the Sheriff's Office, involves one deputy who took the life of an individual in a unfortunate car crash, not even a block away from this very office where I sit. We reviewed all of the facts and made a determination of separating that individual from the service. But I can only recommend, Mr. Fanning, a discipline of that nature, and a review board in Milwaukee County makes a determination whether I applied all the correct principles and made the appropriate judgment. And I'm at the realm of what that body or board decides to do. But to your point, it requires a courageous leader who is not waking up every day and seeing which way the wind blows. I've got to do what's in the best interest of this organization and the people that I serve. And that's my commitment to this community.
Okay, hi, Sheriff Lucas. I have a couple of questions from the inbox. The first question is, please ask, what do we tell our Black sons about interacting with law enforcement and what are their rights? And then the second part of that, do they have the right to detain you when you haven't broken the law, and how do they communicate
that? Thank you.
Without escalating, without getting the situation escalated.
Thank you for that question. Again, we tell our Black sons and daughters and all of our children that, again, law enforcement is there to serve and protect our communities. We certainly have witnessed and seen for years, in communities of color, over-policing, a term that you hear, aggressive policing tactics, and certainly strip searches and other tactics employed by law enforcement officers that are not condoned by their police agencies, nor are they trained in those police agencies. So you have individuals who tend to, once they go out on patrol, they tend to then go out and act outside of the training that they're giving, violating the public trust. And so it's important for all people to know that, again, by and large, police officers and sheriff's deputies that are out on the street, they're there to serve us. Even when they pull us over for a traffic violation, they're doing their duty and they're doing their job. But you have a very small percentage who exceeds the bounds of decency in this profession, just like in any other profession. And it's incumbent upon this sheriff and police chiefs and sheriffs all around the country to weed those individuals out. We must tell our young people to, again, respect the work that law enforcement officers do. They do a job to protect our community, to preserve life and to preserve property. And that when they act within the scope of their duty, you're being pulled over in the car. You're acting in a manner in an area in which a certain activity had just taken place. And now police officers use their instincts to determine whether an individual might have just committed a robbery, as in the case with me. Officers have to play some type of instinct. And again, I think the officer that pulled me over was saying, hey, I was playing a hunch, and let me just pull over and talk to this kid and see what this kid says. I had no reason to fear that officer. That officer ends up going on his way. That can be the lesson for all of our young people if we, again, approach them from the perspective, I have no reason to fear you. I know exactly who I am and what my worth is. I know exactly my rights as to obeying the law. And if we teach our young people that can certainly help avoid all the awful situations that we've seen. I hearken back to Dr. King often because he was so instrumental in my development. But something that Dr. King said in his letter from Birmingham jail, and he said many other times, was that we can't legislate morality, but we can regulate behavior. That we can't make laws change the hearts of men, but we can restrain the heartless. We can't make a man love me, but we can make laws to prevent him from lynching me. And Dr. King said that that's very important too. It is that same thing here, that despite all my best efforts, the lessons that I've been taught, the experiences that I have, and certainly all of the leadership and vision that myself and Dr. Danita Ball and all of the command staff here in this organization has put into this organization, it is incumbent upon us to have leaders out there who are ensuring that our people are operating within the vision of this organization. And when they violate that, we have to step in. We have to step in immediately to ensure that we are protecting the public as well as the integrity of this organization.
All right, thank you, Sheriff Lucas. Okay, we have a couple of questions and comments, so I'm just going to read them in the order in which they are received. This comes from Jenny. She said, "Thank you for your candor." And then this comes from Edwin. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff Lucas, and thank you, Dr. Hall, and others for coordinating this." Then we have another question, and it jumps back to Mr. Fanning's question on the accountabilities of officers, even here in Milwaukee, and particularly about being transparent when situations occur, knowing that this may cause further pleasure, and distrust of the community and police in building relationships.
Well, I'm one who, my coming to the big stage, if you will, was in 1992. I was promoted to the rank of sergeant in the Milwaukee Police Department, and spent 6 months at District Number 2 on the near South Side before receiving a call on a Saturday from then Police Chief Philip Areola, who asked if I would be interested in coming up to his office to be the spokesperson for the police department. And it was in the aftermath of the Dahmer atrocities. Of course, 1991, there was 17 murders committed by one individual, one Jeffrey Dahmer, and the trial of the two officers who on that May evening in 1991 encountered Dahmer and a young Laotian boy, and after in conversation returned the Laotian boy to Dahmer, who promptly went back to his apartment and killed the young man. And when their trial was held in 1992, I was brought into the chief's office to be the spokesperson for all of the national media that was coming to Milwaukee. And that was long before the advent of cell phones and cable news networks and all that kind of thing like that. So there were people right here in Milwaukee on a day in, day out basis from Reuters and other news outlets to cover the trial. And as we know, those two officers received their jobs back after being dismissed by then Police Chief Areola. But it taught me the importance and the lessons of getting in front of a story, telling that story, no matter how bad it is, one has to tell that story. There's a story, and it's not for this conversation, of how even the officers were dismissed. And it wasn't just simply that they did or didn't do the right thing as it relates to that encounter, but that they did not adhere to certain Bill of Rights laws we talked about a little bit earlier as it relates to terminating officers and then their unions standing up and protecting their rights. But it taught me the virtue of transparency such that even I continued on through the trial of the officers. I spent the next 4.5 years in the office of Police Chief Areola. And then in November of 1996, Milwaukee appointed its first African-American police chief, as we know, Arthur Jones. And he came in on the very first day, got rid of everybody that worked in the office, including the executive assistant, and only kept myself on. And Art and I had a relationship, and we went out to lunch that very afternoon. And I told him like a soldier, I said, look, you don't have to, butter me up. Tell me where it is that I'm going and I'll go. What are you talking about? I said, well, you let everybody else go in this office. And I'm the only one. I mean, people are packing their bags, they're crying, they're upset. But he said, if anybody knows what's going on in this office or how to even administer this office, it's you. And I thought, I was humbled by that. Spent the next 2 years, 2.5 years with Chief Jones before he promoted me and moved me up to the 3rd District on the west side. But let me say, it taught me everything about communicating with the public. And then to go to Major League Baseball and to work under one Commissioner Bud Selig, who in the throes of the steroid era of gambling investigations and the like, had the courage to stand out there. And I would ask him, Commissioner, why are you standing out there taking all the incoming for what some owner did or what some player did? And it was because he said, I am the guardian of this game. I am the guardian of this profession. And so that's what propels me and guides me each day, that I am the guardian of law enforcement here in Milwaukee County by standards or definition, the highest law enforcement officer in the county. And I'm going to ensure that we are transparent with the people that we serve. I don't care how bad the news is. I stood in front of a camera on the 25th day of January in 2020 here and said, a terrible thing has happened today. A young man who is a very vital part of our community has lost his life as a result of an action of a Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputy. And I'll leave it to the criminal justice process to determine what his fate is, but there's going to be an investigation into his conduct and activities. And I'm going to ensure justice not only for the family of that gentleman, but also for members of this community. And it's with that type of integrity that guides me in my decision-making every day. And so it's important for us to be transparent. I've said what I'm seeing down in Kenosha right now is not helpful to the situation because there are basic informations that have not been shared thus far. And I'm hopeful that those authorities step forward today and begin that process of transparency, because we saw how candid and how calm the families of Mr. Blake
What time
would
is
be.
Q&A and
So
all?
let's just hope that when encountered by situations, all leaders, police chiefs, sheriffs, elected officials, stand up and do the right things for our community.
Okay, thank you. And then I want to go through, because we got about 5 more minutes. I'm sorry, Dr. Hall, did you?
No,
want-
that's fine. That's what I was about to say. Let's try to get through the rest of the questions because
Okay,
we
this
don't have
comes-
much time left.
Yeah, this comes from Michelle Crockett. Thank you, Sheriff Lucas and Dr. Hall, to participate in this afternoon discussion. It will take time for all of us to make a difference throughout our community. So that was just a comment from her. From Ms. Dorinthia Robinson, it reads, thank you for your time today, Sheriff Lucas. Too often, the only time that many community encounter those in law enforcement when there's a problem, particularly since the residency requirements have changed. How can we better engage with officers to improve those community relationships and begin to change the narrative in negative encounters?
I thank Ms. Robinson for that question. You know, one of the things that I did back in November of 2018, I appointed 3 individuals to lead this organization. And I took a lot of criticism for it because there were 3 women. And I didn't select them because of their gender. I selected them because of their accomplishments. And as I spoke, Dr. Danita Ball, who is a 25-year veteran of the Milwaukee Police Department and has taught at a number of institutions in and around the Milwaukee area, and went on and earned her PhD. And I know she is a proud member of a organization that I won't mention, but Dr. Hall is also a member of that organization, and they wear their colors red very well. But I chose her to lead this organization, to be the face of this organization in terms of putting us on the course of doing the right things. And then I hired an attorney for the very first time in this organization to do 2 things. 1, make sure we do the right things, and 2, make sure we do them the right way. And attorney Molly Zillick, who is from our community, worked in the Corporation Counsel's office here, has been doing just that, doing outstanding work. And then 3rd is an individual that all of us know on this call and all of us know in this community is one Faith Colas. Faith is one who has worked in the print media, electronic media, and every form of media, and had, even in my views, a larger standing in this community than her late husband, Eric Bond. And I asked Faith to be the Director of Public Affairs and Community Engagement so that we could take the Sheriff's Office to the community. And Faith has been very proactive, including coordinating this very call. No one could have anticipated a COVID and then the subsequent the death tragedy of Mr. Floyd that has pushed law enforcement back from the communities it served. But we are still outward facing. We're determined to be engaging. And every time there's a breach or a challenge like Kenosha, it does put us back, but it doesn't discourage us. We are determined to go out there. Residency in this community has set, I think, our community back. I do believe that now about 22% of law enforcement officers who were required to live in the city of Milwaukee now live outside the city of Milwaukee. And I think that's very unfortunate. And it hurts in so many different levels. That's something where, again, the folks in Madison are not listening to the people here in Milwaukee. So we've got to then find candidates who are willing to stand up and step in and be law enforcement officers. And right now it's a very trying time given the scrutiny that we're under, that I think recruitment for the short term is going to be very challenging. But for the very reasons that Ms. Robinson asked the question, is that we need young men and women from this community, Black and brown and of every color, willing to stand in and step up and be law enforcement officers and go out there and serve and protect our communities. And when we can have that, and when we do that, I can assure you that we can certainly find some peace and some a resolution, some calm in our community. And I'm hopeful that we all can go out and advocate for young men and women to choose a career in law enforcement, just like I did as a young man.
Okay. I believe that completes our questions from our audience. So Sheriff Lucas, thank you again so much for today. This has been informative, and it's just been an honor and a pleasure to have you as part of our straight talk with you with our community roundtable. I want to thank BMO Harris again for their sponsorship. They are actually part of our board of directors. And as always, for those who took time to listen today, it's interesting when you said, Sheriff Lucas, that we have to stay focused no matter what. And I don't have the words, I don't think they're totally correct, but John Lewis also said to us, not to drown in the sorrow or, all of what's happening. And he was basically saying, even though it's rough, we still have to stay the course. We still have to remain resilient. And I believe that that's been your message too, as you lead the county. So stay tuned, everyone, to our next virtual community roundtable, the last Wednesday in September 30th. You can always get details of that particular platform on our website. But please be safe, stay masked, stay encouraged, and just know that, as they say, we're better together. And we have to stay the course. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.